Hello, everyone. My name is Cody Scott. I'm from your 510 Public Administration course for personnel. My presentation today is going to be about using big data to recruit. I'm going to go over Moneyball techniques and ways to use technology to focus on the traits that employers want in order to make hiring faster and cheaper and make the public sector more competitive. So let me get my thing pulled up here. Okay. So like I said, Moneyball Recruitment is about using big data and also cybermetrics to hire. I want you to imagine this. You're a manager um, and you lack resources to compete. It's a competitive environment where resources are scarce. You're in extreme financial strain, and you're also in a difficult economic environment, and there's high competition. It's not hard to imagine what it would be like to be in this situation because what we would think of would be public sector versus private sector. But there's also a lot of other situations where this might happen. I'm thinking of like the 2002 Oakland Athletics versus the New York Yankees, where there is a team and a manager who have limited resources and they're trying to find anything possible to give them an edge. Let me give you a brief background of the story so that it makes a little bit more sense. So Moneyball was a book written by Michael Lewis. It's about the 2002 Oakland A's, and they were a struggling baseball team. They were extremely limited in their resources. They would buy the Yankees would buy two players, and that would equal up their whole budget. They were way outspent by other teams. So the manager, Billy Beane, used what's called cybermetrics or big data to focus on recruiting players who excelled, who were good at what they did in a few areas, but they didn't fit the stereotypical mold of the normal baseball player. And the goal was to find cheap players who can perform and who believed in the mission of the club. One example might be with the Astros in 2017. They had Jose Altuve, who was able to perform by getting on base, but he was denied by multiple teams because he was too short. So things like that, where people have this preconceived notion of what they want to hire or who they like to hire, but it's not always the best benefit for their organization. So just as a case in point, here's how it turned out. On the left, we have the Oakland A's compared to the other team salaries. And on the right is the Astros 2017, their opening day salaries compared to those who they beat. So they definitely outspent them, not by just buying the most expensive players, but by focusing on the aspects that they needed specifically and recruiting them. So to compare the old way of hiring to the new way of hiring, it all comes down to it's not evidence-based. The old way of hiring was a gut feeling. I'm going to be saying that a lot. This is a quote from the book. Old recruiters believe they can judge people by simply watching their performance, and they had this gut feeling that this person will perform well on the field in the major leagues, and a lot of times it didn't work out, and it was very costly. In the past, it made teams like the A's lose a lot. So a couple points I want to make of the old way of hiring. It's a lot of manual applications, a lot of time and man hours to go through applications and finding what you want, and then interviews. People do this, or they manually go through these applications or by word of mouth just because it's the way they've always done them. People like the familiarity. A lot of people like to focus on pedigree rather than skills. So if you're from a certain college or if you're from a certain background or company, people feel more drawn to you and you want to get the job. I'm thinking like a mattress firm. They're run by people from SFA alumni. So they hire a lot of SFA people. Not to say that's not bad, but to say it's not the best way of hiring if that's the only way you're going on. And the big point is you're relying on this gut feeling. I really like this guy. He was good in an interview. I like him. And that leads to a lot of arbitrary judgments. There were a couple studies done by different boards that found some pretty horrible patterns. So the corporate executive board found that 3/4 of managers hired based on personality. So if you just seem like a leader, if you get along well, you seem personable, then you're more likely to get the job. That leaves people who are quiet, who may actually do the job better, out of the picture. The American Sociological Association found that most top managers like people with the same hobbies. So again, people like them. And this would immediately lead you to the question of why do people do this? And we'll get on to that in the next slide. The new way, a lot of electronic and high volume of applications. If you've ever applied for jobs recently, they're all online, a lot of questions, a lot of word matching. It's good because it helps weed through people who you'd want, people with a certain amount of training or education. That leads to data mining. We're going to go more into that later, but that's about picking out patterns in data and a large amount of data to fit exactly what you need for the job. You find that out through job matching, which we'll go over again in the later slides, which will lead those characteristics that you decided were best for the job to the best candidate, kind of link them together. It's evidence-based. Instead of just feeling like this person would be a good match for the job, it's more on how many years of experience they have, what are their skill sets. And the selection is from chosen variables, so managers can specifically pick variables for different jobs. A lot of people are having a hard time with diversifying with different people, and this is a way where you can choose that to start hiring instead of just the best person in the interview. Here's a good quote. The vast majority of hiring decisions are made on a gut feeling, personal experience, and this corporate belief system. This is like the vice president of marketing spending millions of dollars on a new campaign because he or she always did it that way. A lot of people are realizing this, but not everyone's doing it. So why doesn't everyone use this? Sounds like a great deal, I would hope. Well, there's two big reasons why. And the first one is human nature. There's a lot of things in human nature that doesn't help us act so rationally. This has always been an ongoing problem throughout philosophy and politics, and I would be ashamed if I didn't bring up my favorite two guys in public administration. Chester Bernard, he did a lot of good work explaining how humans are biologically limited, and the limiting factor is social in nature. We are very socially keen to pick up things that we don't even know that we're picking up on. Bad mannerisms throw us off. People who are shy or quiet throw us off, and we tend to unconsciously write them off. And also Herbert Simon, in administrative behavior, he said the central concern of administrative theory is the boundary between the rational and the non-rational aspects of human behavior. So these two men, along with a lot of others, see that the social nature of humans can throw people off without us even knowing. People can unconsciously choose people more like them, people who look like them or act like them or behave like them. They're more drawn to because it's what they're most familiar with. So this could be unconscious, you could do it without knowing it, or it could be conscious, you feeling like people are different than you. And the other reason is perceived difficulty. Whenever you hear big data and people throw around analytics, it immediately throws people off who don't like statistics or didn't do well in their statistics class. So data mining can work when you're hiring for virtually any job. It can work anywhere. Case in point with baseball and with the public sector. And yet no companies bother to do it. And one analytic software came up with this table here on the right, where the biggest problem is the perceived costs. And then they also perceive that the current method is effective. Again, human nature, sticking with what they're most familiar with. And then again, too complex, which we can all understand. But with a lot of these companies, you sign up, they're a lot more cheaper than the man hours you put in. And they're a lot more simpler. You pick out the variables you need, and it matches with the data that candidates put in. So in the past, there were a handful of principles that people hired on. Electoral popularity, that's with public officials. Social class, back in the day, a lot of people would focus on where you came from, who you knew. patronage was the same. These last four are the ones that we most recently started picking on, and therefore the most rational to us. Merit is very important to us. Seniority, representativeness, which is more recently wanted to represent the citizens that we're serving, and also character, job, and organization fit. The last four are big things that Moneyball could help with, Moneyball techniques. In picking merit, you can pick up the different knowledge and skills that they test for or that they input. You can put in the number of years that you have for seniority. And then also representativeness. Some firms, most recently law firms in big cities, have been doing this, putting in minorities or people from different countries to recruit more diverse workforce. So it's really for anything that you target. And these all kind of fit with the eras. So social class spoils, you think of President Jackson. Early merit and expanded merits, where they really focus on technical qualifications and more seniority for hiring. And expanded access, that's more like affirmative action or any other criteria. And then there's contemporary trends, which is what we're most familiar with, performance criteria, representativeness, and technology efficiency with web-based screening methods and job fits. So there's a lot of screening that you can do for these big data applications where you have key questions. How many years have you worked in the accounting industry? And if they don't put a certain amount of years, you automatically get filtered out. This helps with the big data aspects of it. Something that you couldn't do with paper forms or even just manually going through the electronic forms that have been turned in. For recruitment, there are a handful of tools. Data mining, job matching, and job analysis are a must for Moneyball. These tools may answer valuable questions for recruitment, like what are the applicants doing, where are the applications coming from, and what recruiting or hiring experience are they having, and it also answers some questions about the organization. You have to dig deep into each position and the organizational goal to decide what you're going to look for in the goal, look for an applicant, and also what is the position worth. Again, we're talking about organizations who are financially tight on money. So we have to look into which position is worth investing money in, and also which ones maybe aren't worth keeping going. A lot of baseball teams, like with the A's when Billy Beane came in, there were a lot of big name players who weren't performing, and you just have to cut them, especially if they're not on board with the organizational goal, and then find newer employees who will be on board with the goals. So data mining. Practically speaking, data mining is all about determining what players contribute most to your organization's outcome, rather than going by perceived wisdom, which is often unreliable. Again, that is human nature that we were talking about. Generally handles a large amount of data, and it's much more effective in discovering patterns, unknown correlations, things that you didn't know about the position, and people applying, trends and preferences, much more effectively than traditional hiring processes, which is all just what was put on the application, and then you don't find out more about the applicant until the interview. And data mining specializes with volume, lots of volume, quick analytics, velocity, and variety, different types of people with different types of skill, and it picks on the variables that you've chosen to decide which one's best for your job. To decide that, you have to do job analysis, something we talked about in class. That is a systematic process of collecting data for determining the knowledge, skills, and abilities, KSAs, required to perform a job successfully to make numerous judgments about it. So this is where you have to break down the job, not the person, but the job. So you have to identify basic job duties, the KSAs needed for the job, the bare minimum, and then you can also add in different varieties of things that you've learned that you needed. Job environment, you need someone who has worked in the environment and also maybe is a better fit for the organization. And then job goals, what is that specific job's goal? And then you pick out the variables that would contribute to it. And that determines the responsibilities for that job, the compensation, if it's higher or lower. If it's more important, you would pay them more. If it's something that's where the last person who worked there was paid a lot just because they've been there a lot, but they didn't really perform, you could hire someone on for less. And then also determines the education experience and other related criteria needed for hiring, and as well as training. This can be used for people who have worked there, and then you decide that their role on their job needs to be expanded to cover more areas. And job matching is the science of carefully defining superior performance in each position and using objective criteria to determine who is hired. So this would be just selecting your traits. This would be picking out from the data that they inputted to decide which job would be best for them. So you can pick them for interviews, even if they didn't apply for that job. It's less subjective. It's less based on your gut feeling and more on your knowledge. It's cheaper because less man hours and the software involved with it can replace the man hours used in HR, so it could save even more money that way. It's faster, and it's arguably more accurate because it's picking out exactly what the hiring team wanted. And the benefits, of course, you get a more complete profile of the job candidates, not just what they put on their resumes, but what they input into the electronic application, and also what you decided was best for the job as well. It increases retention because you're hiring better people for the job. There's no more someone showing up for a week and leaving, which seems to happen with every job I've been to. It increases performance because it more specifically focuses on the job for each person, so it better fits them. And it also helps you decide the training for them as well. So you would put more attention to the applicant's training in something that they're interested in and that you're interested in and that you know is worth investing. Fast results, better candidates, and long-term return. You have people who are better suited, who will stay longer, who are worth investing in. So in the long run, these are people who you can train and hope to succeed, even top managers. And I also want to note that it can be used for targeting. It has been used for targeting in bigger cities where they needed more diverse people, either international or minority people, or if you need someone who's from outside the field. Going back to baseball again, the Astros back in 2013 hired NASA engineers to help with their analytics and finding these different patterns. Same with Billy Beane, using different NASA-type scientists to help pick out these patterns. Now that we know these, we can use these patterns. Don't have to hire these scientists, but it helps getting people from outside the field to find exactly what management wants in that position. So the big takeaways is in developing the job role, you have one vision, goal, and one mission. By defining the job, you're really getting to the core of what you want from the job, and it helps with hiring different candidates. Remember the human element. We're all flawed, and we're mainly socially flawed in that we pick up different patterns that may not necessarily be the most rational. We need to lean more towards evidence-based decisions. We have this technology now where it's easier and cheaper, and it could give us the edge. It helps us to define our talent, defining our desired metrics, skills, and qualifications for our job. We start defining what is worth putting money into. It also helps with long-term success. We're finding job where we're making better decisions, more rational decisions, which will help with finding candidates that are just better for the job. Before I end, I just want to point out that there is a great association called Moneyball for Government. They have the same sort of principles, building evidence about policies and practices, and they help with more rationally based decisions and all sorts of government, big and small. There's some senators signed up for that. A lot of city councils are in on that. Hopefully, I will get the Moneyball for Government book for Christmas. But I always find them very fascinating. They have a lot of different applications, and hiring is just one that they have out there that they're trying to promote. Again, that's everything. This is my work reference. If you need anything, let me know. I can send it to you. That's everything. I hope you guys have a great break. And I'll see you next time.